Hi, this is Jim Richardson of Animateducated, and today we have a very special guest. Another cousin of mine is also an actor, and his name is James Carpenter, San Francisco area, and he is a well-known Shakespearean actor there. He's also done a lot of work. There is a picture of him here right now. He's
Hello.
a
How you doing?
I've seen you twice this week in different plays, totally different characters.
I've done 3 readings so far. I did one show called One Flea Spare. It's a play about 4 people locked in a room together during the 1600 plague of London.
Oh.
And it was written back in 1990s, I think, and it's incredibly insightful and prescient piece of work, and it felt right to do at this time, but it was really weird. I'm stage actor mostly. I do a little bit of film, and this is so very different because you can't look at the person in the eye, and
Right.
eye contact is so important to me on stage. The audience, not so much, oddly. When I'm on stage, I have to ignore them. I can't I can't pretend they're there. It's like this filter that you have to allow laughter and audience reactions through. But the filter is always different depending on the audience. And so if you're thinking about the audience, you're not doing your job, right?
Mhm.
So I'm always focused on the actors on stage, and I keep wanting to look at the little boxes that are talking, and
Yeah,
I can't. I have to look into the camera.
right,
And we haven't. That platform has not been developed enough to lock those boxes in place, so that we could
right,
figure out how to, look over at somebody and talk to them like that. And
right,
not only that, but if you do that, you take your eyes off the script. So
right.
what I've got to do is have my zoom controls in one window over here,
Mhm.
and then over here on like this half of the page, I've got to have the script itself and
Mhm.
keep it scrolling with one hand,
Oh,
and
wow.
keep the text up at the top of the page here. So I'm reading as close into the camera as possible.
Ah,
Um, but it's weird. It's like you have to be your own sound man, your own technician, your own
right.
costume person, your own lighting designer. As you can see, I haven't mastered that part yet. And for this particular play too, there was a lot of stuff that got done to me. I had to
Right.
take off my shoes. I had to poke a guy
Right.
with a cane. I got an orange screwed down onto my finger from one of the other actors. He screws it down onto my finger and pulls it off, and then drinks from the orange. And so what we had to do, the actor who was playing the other role and I had to take pictures of the props. How big is your orange? Oh, it's about that big, And we'd send them to each other. And do you have any rope? Yeah, I've got rope. Mine's white. Mine's black. So break out the magic marker and color my rope black. And so we got all
Mhm.
our props kind of set up. And then on one side of my laptop, I had apple, rope, orange, spray bottle for when somebody spits water in my face. So and then I had to tie myself up. So yeah, figure that one out. What I wound up doing was actually putting a coil of rope around my waist that was tied before
Huh.
I even started.
Yeah.
And then when the time came, I pulled it up onto my shoulders like that. So you got some kind of impression that
Right.
I was being tied up, because the director didn't want stage directions read.
Uh-huh.
So for the orange bit, he had an orange, I had an orange, and I had one sleeve bare and one sleeve down like this, and it
Ah,
it was black, and we were using black background,
right.
and so I pre-cut a hole in the orange, and then would take this arm and go like that and pull it off. And in the meantime, he would go and pull his
Right.
orange away. and squeeze like that.
Oh my
But it
God.
was, yeah, it was nuts. It was like you're juggling all this stuff. You know, what do I do now? Okay, yeah,
Right.
mic off, camera off, boom, camera back on, mic.
And
It's,
it wasn't edited. I mean, you had to do this live. So,
yeah, we did, yeah, it was on the spot. It was a live performance, and it came off pretty well, I thought, all things considered. It was, you know, a lot of it was dependent on the technology we had.
mhm.
We had a well-known Canadian actor from a Canadian series that I can't remember right now, and a lovely guy, but all he had was an iPhone. So that doesn't leave room for the text.
Oh wow.
So his script was down here. So his path of vision
Oh,
was much different than mine, which was all up into the camera.
right, right.
He had to be doing that all the
Yeah,
time.
yeah. Yeah, it's a whole new experience though, I bet.
Yeah, it really is. It was really important for me to do though, because you know all the theaters have closed now,
Yeah.
and I thought, so is this the death of theater? You know, am I
Yeah.
going to be able to do this anymore? It was necessary to prove to myself that creativity can't be contained,
Mhm.
that it can't be stifled or quarantined, that you can create anywhere. Um, and these are just the first fumbling steps in this direction. Um, I'm curious to see what is going to come out of it performance-wise. There's this wonderful um, video of the Juilliard students of music and dance, I think, did this wonderful Zoom presentation. If you get a chance to see it, check it out, because it's really quite inspiring to see what can be done in the face of adversity. You know.
How did you become, interested in acting? What made you say, yeah, I want to do that?
Girls, girls. There are a lot of girls in theater. No, I. That's partially true.
Yeah.
I. It's funny. I think the roots of it were in my high school English class, and I got asked to read the Gettysburg Address or something like that one day in class, and you know it in high school when somebody gets called up, the rest of the class will go, oh, Carpenter's got to read Gettysburg Address,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
they gave me all sorts of shit, and I was a total geek, as we all were, um, and so to kind of shut out all their stuff, I just got into the words, and they were very, they were words we'd all heard many times, and in a way they ceased to have meaning. They became formulaic, like the Pledge of Allegiance. I started reading this document, and I don't know what happened exactly, but suddenly the entire class was quiet, and I wasn't acting it. I was just reading the words, and something happened. Something got created in that moment, and then my voice broke, and the whole class cracked up and they cracked up because for that long they had been there with me, and that was, I think, the closest thing to magic that I'd found at that point. And it wasn't a matter of control. It was a matter of making an offer to an audience and saying, I want to tell you a story. And it's a really good story. And if you just drop all your preconceptions. If you just open yourselves up and come with me, we're going to have a lot of fun. And, you know, when an audience does that, when a live audience does that, it's thrilling. It's really thrilling. It's a little bit like church to me, because they are thoroughly trusting you, and you can't let them down, you know. But my actual first stage experience was pretty ludicrous. I'd gotten asked to do a play called Father Goose in high school, playing a sex-crazed 17-year-old, which I basically was. And my first entrance, I was supposed to walk on stage towards the actor on stage right, and, you know, taking my jacket off and throw it over my shoulder in the general direction of the coat rack. And so I walk on stage and throw my jacket off and look at my friend, and his eyes are like, oh, and the audience loses it. And I can't see what they're laughing at. And so I very slowly turn. And as I turn, the audience starts laughing more because they know what I'm going to see. And there's my coat hanging on one of the pegs. Boom, right by the neck, boom, like I just walked over and dropped it off. And I was so dumbfounded that I like totally dropped character, broke the scene. I walked over to the coat rack and picked it up, and the coat had landed on the little loop on the inside of the coat. And I lost my shit. And I turned the coat around to show the audience, and they lost it even more. They were pounding on the tables by then. And I had never been in front of an audience who was laughing because of me, not laughing at me, laughing because of me.
Right.
And I cracked up. I just stood there like a goon and went, and I finally got back on track with the scene, and I got off stage, and the other actors reamed me. Absolutely reamed me. You should never do that. You should never. I was like, hey, I don't know the rules. It's the first time I've done this. Cut me some slack. But that one moment of creating laughter was magical, and that was it. From that point on, I knew what I was going to do. I had planned on becoming a veterinarian. Those were my big plans, because biology was the only thing I was good at. I sucked at everything else. And from that point on, I was gone. I was hooked. And I continued to be an awful student after I got out of high school. My father was a military man, 30 years in the Army, and a full colonel, and very dictatorial. And as soon as I got out from under his thumb, it was party. And I did. I partied and I did theater, and every once in a while I went to class. And I got kicked out of school justifiably on academic suspension, and because I got arrested for smoking pot in New Mexico in the 1970s. I'm very lucky I didn't go to prison. But at any rate, that was my education cut short. You know, I'd had a little bit. I'd had a taste, and I knew that I needed more. I needed to learn more. And I started working around town with directors that I thought I was learning things from, and that I thought were actually smart. There was a man named Mark Medoff who was a pretty well-known writer in the 70s and 80s. I think one of his plays was a Pulitzer Prize winner, actually. And Mark cast me in a show he'd written called When You Comin' Back, Red Ryder, which had been not on Broadway, but he wound up taking over the lead. A guy named Marjo Gortner had been playing the lead, and Marjo Gortner was a boy evangelical preacher early on. But he dropped out for whatever reasons, and Mark took over the role, and Mark won a fucking Obie for it. He won like a Drama Critics Circle Award or something, you know. So he knew the play, and he'd written the play, and he was directing the play and playing the lead. And I was Red Ryder. I was the title character. And that was a real learning experience for me. And Mark, bless his heart, wrote me a very, very nice recommendation, so that when I finally did attempt acting, and it was some years before I did, I was 27 before I really went for it. I'd been working at a pizza parlor in Sacramento and losing my mind, putting my wife through so she could get her graduate degree in costumes. But I was going nuts. I was doing theater where I could, but it was a soul-killing job. And I just thought, you know, I'm going to lose my mind if I don't ever see if I could do this or not. If I don't ever make that step, I will wonder about it for the rest of my life. And so I auditioned at Ashland, Oregon, which is a very well-known Shakespeare company. And by some fucking miracle, I got hired. And that was the start of my professional career. My wife and I moved up there, and I was there 3 years. And then I went down to the Old Globe Theater in San Diego, and I did a year of interning there and got my union card, my equity card. And I went up to Berkeley to audition for something, and got hired to play a punk rocker at Berkeley Repertory Theater, and became a company member there. They had a true repertory company at that time. They had a circle of actors, 16 to 20 actors, who would all switch off roles. That's cool. You know, one show you'd play a small role, one show you'd play a larger role. And we did like 6 shows a year, but it was a really, really fine company. And I learned so much. And I fell in love with the Bay Area. And I thought, well, this is my home. You know, I don't want to go to LA, and I don't want to go to New York. I don't, there's a certain level of big city that I can take. And after that, it's like, no, this is too big for me. I call New Mexico my home state. And there aren't cities like that in New Mexico. And it was really important for me to be able to be close to nature. And San Francisco Bay Area was it for me. And I've been extremely blessed in that I have worked almost continuously, and I'm pretty well known in the area now. I'm called a local treasure, whatever the hell that means.
Last year you did Scrooge, or you were
Christmas Carol, yeah.
Yeah, Christmas Carol, right. So did you, how long were you doing that?
I've played Scrooge at American Conservatory Theater, which is, it's the big regional theater in San Francisco. It's about a 1,000-seat theater. For 13 years now. I started out as the understudy, and then took over the role the next year, and I've inhabited it as fully as I can. Dickens was a man who was so angry at the things that were going on in society then, some of which are still happening today. You know, there's poverty, lack of education, there's hunger. And these things in England at that time they were hideous. I mean, I've seen pictures of people who were these little shrunken gnomes of children from malnutrition, you know, joblessness, was the jobless rate was sky high. Children would work in the factories up to 18 hours a day, and I'm talking like six-year-old children. Child labor was one of his bugaboos. But I realized that was the target audience, was not children, it was adults. And to make that message land, if I made him funny, what I did was I let the audience off the hook. I didn't take them that whole journey to redemption. So I'm a nasty son of a bitch when I play Scrooge, and I am not nice. But that journey, that cruelty, that antisocial man who has shut down all these doors in his heart and shut out the rest of humanity, when that opens up again, it's that voyage is so much larger. I love doing it. I really love doing it. It's hard
Yeah.
as hell. It's probably the hardest thing I do, and it gets harder every year. There are 29 kids in the cast, and everybody gets sick every year.
Mhm.
I think last year was the first year I did not get sick.
Mm.
And that was such a gift because it's so draining to perform when you're ill. The first year I did it, I think I got walking pneumonia.
Mm.
And I had an understudy, but I'd never allowed an understudy to go on for me. And I finally, put my big boy pants on and said, yeah, go for it, until I got a little better. And that was really hard to do. That was really hard to do. It's incredibly draining. I had a really hard time because the character himself is so tense and so locked down. I had such a hard time keeping that tension out of my body,
Mm.
actually keeping it out and not bringing it home.
Mm.
That, man, my back would lock up. I'd feel like somebody had pounded on me. It's a very it's a fairly physical performance because of the demands of the space. You have to be very vocal. You have to know how to project. And we're mic'd and stuff like that. But I was trained without mics,
Yeah.
so I finally learned to let the microphone do a little more work for me and to back off my voice less. But keeping the tension of the role out of my neck, out of my voice, out of my body, so I can do it day after day was a real learning curve. Live performance, I think one of the hardest things about theater is coming on stage and making it new every night. If you're just saying your lines, if you're just repeating your lines, that's not acting. You're just spouting. Talking, hearing the words for the first time that other people are saying to you, and saying those words for the first time, I think is one of the hardest things about it. Letting words that you've heard hundreds of times before go, what? Not anticipating what the other person is going to say, not anticipating how you're going to feel. This is what I do next,
Mhm. Mhm.
and still keeping it within the framework of what the director and the cast have decided that play is. That it's locked in to a certain point, but you do have flexibility to explore within that framework. And I like doing that. I think that keeps it really fresh. Years ago, I did a production of To Kill a Mockingbird at my old school that I didn't graduate from, and I was asked to give a talk to non-theater students afterwards. So I did the performance that night, and this group that had seen the show came, and I had a talk with them. And this one kid raised his hand, and I said, "Yes, sir," in the back row there. And he says, "How do you do that? How do you make yourself into a different person?" And I said, well, let me see. For Atticus Finch, I decided that maybe he'd been in a war, and maybe he'd gotten a little shrapnel. So his walk changed. You know, his walk, which had been like that, it suddenly, there's a little limp there. And you know, I found the voice for him when I found the accent for him. I added that on. Then I decided that maybe since his shoulders maybe a little higher too, there's something going on there, and I gradually built this character from this regular persona of mine, and the kid came out of his chair and went, "How do you do that?" Which it was wonderful. It was one of the best compliments I've ever received. But that's what I mean about creating magic. You get to transform sometimes. Those moments are kind of cool. You have to. I sent you this picture of me doing the creature, and that was the creature was an adaptation of Frankenstein that a friend of mine did, and it was one of the probably the most wickedly hard scripts I've ever had to memorize. I didn't get it right until our first preview. Frankenstein is told in two stories, the doctor and then the creatures. And so essentially what he did was he took two monologues. He distilled those two roles down into monologues and then boom, put them together. So anything you said had nothing to do with what the other character was saying. In other words, it wasn't, how you doing today? I'm fine, how are you? They weren't normal conversations. You were essentially the other half of the conversation. And so memorizing that sucker was hella hard. It was hella hard. But we had done a reading of it at the Magic Theater in San Francisco 2 years prior as a live reading on Halloween. And so we had a live audience, and then it was podcast out. But for that, for those two performances, I kind of developed a rough outline of the creature. And I found this voice. I found a voice to use for him. And I found that when I was speaking, when I was using the script, my hands started doing this stuff all by themselves. It was the way he thought. And so when we went into rehearsal for the full production, I wound up doing these vocal drills. So, you know, pitch-wise, so I could go down low as I possibly could. And then would do a very extensive warm-up before each show with the other actor. And we'd essentially run act one, which was maybe 40 minutes. But by 10 minutes into that, your body is, your entire body becomes a resonator when you're speaking like that. It was like, I could feel the back of my neck vibrating, my back, my chest. It was like it's like you were playing a human cello. And I had this, I knew how he breathed. I knew how he thought and how the words came out of his mouth. There was and it was wonderful. It was a fantastic, fantastic production. But nobody had seen me do anything like that before, you know, and a lot of, I guess that's one of the frustrating things about acting, is that we are all capable of such a range of expression and emotion, but you get categorized, you know, he's a serious actor, or he's comic, or and people fail to take into account the rest of the things that you can do, or they don't know them even. And so that was kind of cool to be able to do and go, yeah, I can do that too.
So, do you have any other advice for animators wanting to be actors or actors wanting to be animators?
Any art, be it sculpting, painting, acting, whatever, you have to watch your world and you have to watch people. And if you don't do that, I think ultimately you will fail. Because that is the canvas that we draw from, yeah, people.
Mhm.
And all those characters that you animate, be they real or fantasy, they all come from real people. They all come from emotions that are familiar, motions that are familiar. And what you need to do as animators is learn how to get specific, just as any actor does, just as any painter does. You need to be specific with your choices. That's incredibly important, I think. I think I learned all my comedy from old Warner Brothers cartoons. You know, I swear to God, I got more lessons about comedy watching Warner Brothers and timing. Their timing was exquisite. Um, and I love Warner Brothers cartoons. I swear to God, I think I've seen every one of them, and I don't watch cartoons today anymore because they don't just make it for me. They just don't quite get there for me, and that's not a criticism on today's animation. That's just me. What I loved about those cartoons was that they were so fully filled character-wise that they became very real to me, you know? And you couldn't deny their ludicrousness. You couldn't, and at the same time, there was also uh, uh, an element of pathos there, if you will. Wile E. Coyote never got the damn Roadrunner, never got him. How sad is that? You know, this poor schmuck. That's part of comedy. It's funny, pathos is part of comedy. The Russian sense of humor is so vastly different from the American sense of humor. It is back to back with tragedy. And so something which is intensely painful can also be very funny. My wife had a gal working with her in her costume studio named Titania or something like that. And they were talking about, you know, comedy shows. And Titania one day said, oh, I love these American comedies. They're so funny. They make me laugh so hard. And they said, well, what kind of comedies do you watch, Titania? And she said, oh, As the World Turns, The Days of Our Lives. They were all soap operas, which she thought were hysterically funny. So there's this weird back-to-back, you know, it's like the comedy and tragedy mess. They are very close to each other. Pain is very close to joy. Explore as animators. Explore whether or not you're using a character that is a fantasy character or a real, very human character. Explore that range of what that character might feel. Finding your voice as an artist of any kind, I think, is very important because it is that unique quality which will get you employment. It is that unique voice of yours that will that people will hear and go, oh wow, that's cool. I like that. So it behooves you as artists, any artist, to really explore and find out who you are.
Hey, I want to thank James Carpenter, my cousin and guest today on Animated Educated. I hope you enjoyed that. If you haven't subscribed, please do so, and we'll see you next time on Animated Educated.